And welcome back to the Cover 3 podcast here on CBS Sports. That's Danny Kanell. That's Bud Elliott. I'm Chip Patterson, and it is so great to be back with you, gentlemen. It is great to be back with you, the listeners. We hope you enjoyed our around-the-clock week. We're going to continue to lean on those 24/7 Sports team insiders throughout the offseason, heck, maybe even into the season. We really appreciate those of you who have enjoyed some of those episodes. Bud, you've done a lot of the heavy lifting, so thank you on a personal level. I checked in with Anna. I've got some more on my to-do list. Some 24/7 writers will be hearing from me this week, but thank you for that. I thought that it was a great way for us to start scanning the country. Again, something we're going to continue to do throughout the week. Today, we've got some headlines that we want to make sure that we react to that have happened since we last all gathered together, including some very, very, very interesting additions for Georgia. One we thought was coming, one, not unsurprising, but certainly brings a lot of intrigue to how the Bulldogs offense with JT Daniels is going to click. The LSU's got a little bit of a staff shakeup, but the big news of June as we sit here and record on Monday, June 7th, is what is happening all across the country. It is the end of the dead period, and we're starting to see camps. We're starting to see staffs really get a chance to meet up with these kids. The highest profile prospects, I mean, they're double dipping. We got players in the first 24 hours that are doing Midnight Madness in Tallahassee and then going over to the barbecue in Miami and figuring out ways to somehow get to as many places as possible. The coaches told us that this was going to be wild, but I am very excited. As we start to look at what's happened and eventually get to, as you see from the headline, what makes a great recruiter. I mean, this is always going to be a podcast that is uniquely informed in Florida State issues. Okay, I mean there is no way around it. But the Midnight Madness in Tallahassee drew some big time attention. Bud, you were there, right? Were you there at midnight or? Well,
no, I was not there at midnight. As you guys might have seen with our new vacation policy for CBS, we have to go ahead and basically use it or lose it. So I used it. I was in Vegas for 5 days. Got to play Shadow Creek. Got to throw in a little plus 900 on Georgia for the Natty, and took some plus 250 for the SEC as well. But no, I was in Tallahassee for the mega camp, and this is something that it's basically a huge satellite camp. They had over 2,500 kids in Tallahassee on Sunday, just a couple days after visits opened up. And the real purpose of this, for the most part, I mean, I'm sure FSU staff gets to evaluate kids and gets to meet kids in person for the first time because they were hired and then the pandemic hit almost instantly. Very few, opportunities they've had to actually meet players in person. But the real benefit of this is they go out and they invite all these college staffs to come to their campus. I think they had 63 schools in all, which is a ton. There were a lot of logos I didn't even recognize, which means FCS, probably some D2. And then a lot of logos I did recognize, right? Minnesota, Indiana, Arizona State, Penn State. I saw Jamie Chadwell there from Coastal Carolina. He said he's down to come on the Cover 3 podcast, by the way. So going to have him on to come chat. Pretty cool offense he runs there at Coastal. And a bunch of other guys I knew. So it was a great opportunity for me to get with some college coaches that I usually would see at the convention or if I stopped by their school. But for the Noles staff, it was an opportunity to interact with all these high school coaches who bring their kids up there. And the high school coaches absolutely loved it because there were more than 100 offers that went out yesterday from the camp. Almost none of them from the Noles, right? But if you're a high school coach, you love that, man, I get to have my players evaluated. They might get loved on a little bit. They might get an offer. They might get told, hey, if you have a nice senior season, you can have an offer. That keeps them motivated throughout the summer. It also means you don't have to spend a ton of money to go on a week-long bus tour throughout the Southeast. I know those are still happening some, but it's a real big benefit. And it seems like it was a smart move. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of money to spend, obviously, but to put the thing on. But that was why they did it. And I think overall, from that standpoint, it was a success. And all these college staffs were extremely excited to get down there and see prospects, because they haven't seen them in person in forever.
How different is this mega camp than in pre-COVID? Like, would there have been a Florida State mega camp that would have had 30 FCS Group of 5 teams there, or is this something that we haven't even seen anything like this?
FSU, to my knowledge, has never done a satellite camp of this scale. I don't know that they're going to do this every year. Maybe they will because it was such a success and they pulled it off. Typically, what you would have happen is a much smaller school would do this and invite a bunch of P5s. I think USF had one year with like Michigan and all those schools coming down there. Remember when Harbaugh was doing all the satellite camp stuff and people were really up in arms about it. I will say, I don't know if you guys ever been to, Danny, you obviously have, Chip, I assume you have, but for the audience out there, you oftentimes do see a good number of FCS schools that are friendly with the staff. Now, they won't bring the size of the coaching staffs that they brought. I mean, some of these teams brought 7, 8, 9 coaches to this thing. But you will normally see, hey, if, for instance, like Rick Trickett, FSU's old offensive line coach, would always have a couple guys he was tight with in the business who were at FCS schools. And you got to organize it in such a way that you're not bringing in schools that are legitimate competition for you if you're doing your job well on the recruiting trail, right? Like you didn't see Georgia or the Gators or LSU at FSU satellite camp, right? You could say, hey, Penn State and Arizona State. Yeah, but I would argue that if the Noles are doing their job, those are not legitimate competitors for most of the kids in the state of Florida that you would go head to head with them on. But it was definitely bigger than normal. SMU also had a huge one on the same day. You had a lot more schools that recruit Texas strongly at that one. And
I thought they said there was 4,000 players at that one.
I wouldn't doubt it.
I saw an article about it. It's insane.
Dallas is a hell of a lot easier to get to than Tallahassee because nobody actually lives in the Gulf of Mexico. Danny, you've made that drive before.
Yeah.
Oh
my goodness. What's the because I'm curious to know. I texted you guys this. I had a nephew who was there as a camper, like as a kid who's trying to get there. And he's a rising junior, hasn't played a lot. He's trying to get exposure. He wants to try to, get out there. His goal is to play college football somewhere. And so I was texting with his dad, my brother-in-law, and I was like, how'd it go? Because I'm curious with 2,500 kids, is there really an evaluation or is it just getting them on campus so you can have the time with them? Because I'll read you the text from my brother-in-law, and this may be just the case because he's not ranked. He's not a star. He's not, he doesn't have any of that behind him. But he said there were so many kids. They basically had 2 hours divided into 15-minute sessions. Several of the sessions, his son, my nephew, would only get 2 reps. He said, but he still loved it. But, he's like, you didn't exactly get a great chance to evaluate. Is that how it is for everybody? Is it more just to get them on campus and then you already know who's there? Or is there a kid or 2 or 50 that can turn heads by their performance in this mega camp?
So I think he means by reps, like one-on-one reps.
Right.
So the way they broke it down was there were like 2,500 kids. There were actually, there were 4 sessions, right? And within that, they were all broken up by position. And each session lasted, I think, about 2 hours. Like the one-on-ones were kind of a small part of it at the end. And for that, you're not going to get that many reps because there's just not enough field space to,
right.
To do one-on-ones really at any camp. Like that's always the thing we hear from high school coaches and players and parents is, hey, I didn't get as many one-on-one reps as I wanted. Well, yeah, that's kind of what happens. But they go through drills and get evaluated at any kind of camp like this, throughout. And the coaches are definitely watching all of it. Like the college coaches are not just standing around BSing and waiting for one-on-ones. Like they want to see the one-on-ones, but they're looking for the guys in one-on-ones who popped in the agility drills, right? In the position specific drills, because that's who they're writing down in their notebook or their phone or their tablet or, whatever they want to use. So it is hard to get noticed, I think, by the very best schools if you don't pop and like really, really flash. But the thing is, if you had a good day, you're almost certain to get noticed by somebody because there are, like my friend coaches at Akron, his list that he's writing down is a hell of a lot different than my friend who coaches at Penn State. Like they're not looking at the same type of kids. He's like, hey, what do you know about this kid? What do you know about that kid? It's different because the type of player that can play at that school just looks different. If you're Akron, you're probably looking for guys who, it's almost like baseball scouting. You're looking for dudes who are not gonna emerge and get plucked away by Penn State. You want to find guys you can actually sign. So yeah, I think one-on-ones, that's something that pretty much always happens. Like you're not going to get a zillion reps in one-on-ones. I thought the field held together okay, but it's the IM fields over there by College Town.
Right.
So like that's the only really space they have to put on, 4 full-size football fields really.
When you've got those kind of numbers, how much is it valid to say that there's just like an energy point to it where for Florida State, when you're just trying to just drum up a lot of enthusiasm and you're trying to really make this something that is going to impress the players at the top of your board, like you were willing to invite thousands of kids because of the environment that it might create and how it just might be able to create an impression of this great positive momentum of a program that is building for the future. Because if you're inviting all these other staffs and you're, allowing this to not just be a Florida State exclusive event, the reaction that I'd followed certainly said this is all positive. This is all good stuff for Florida State. Do you sense that that's part of it? It's like more the merrier because it's a bigger party. And if it's a bigger party, then it's better for us because it just creates this like energy and environment that makes us feel big.
Oh, I see what you mean. So they actually had their elite camp on Saturday.
Okay.
Right. Like if you were a player they really wanted to evaluate and was already on their radar and had an offer or was pretty close to like, if you show up and you confirm in person what we see on film, then you probably came to the elite camp. There were a couple kids who were like elite camp invites who actually were in Tuscaloosa on the night of elite camp. So they did come, to the more cattle call type camp. The reason they do this is basically as a huge favor to the high school coaches in the state, right? And say, hey man, look, we're bringing all these schools to Tallahassee so your kids can get seen. It's really not about FSU evaluating these kids. 99%. I mean, of the 2,500 kids at that camp, I think they offered 4 and would probably like maybe put another 10 or 12 on their list. And most of those are underclassmen, like to continue monitoring. It's really not about like, it's not about FSU evaluating those guys. It's throwing a bone to the high school coaches in the state to get all these major schools and some minor schools down there to see your kids.
Which is,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that we're going to get to the actual conversation in a second, but relationships with high school coaches, very high on my power ranking of what makes a great recruiter.
Yeah. Oh, right. Exactly. And then they're also hosting, I think, 8 more camps after this that are position specific, like on a day. So if you really popped at something like this, they can invite you back. And, if you can find a way to get to Tallahassee, you can do that. But as far as I know, like the coaches I talked to there were pretty happy about it. As far as like the other coaches on the other staffs. And for me, that was a real benefit. I know these FSU guys well. I can, hit them up pretty much whenever I need to. Not trying to humble brag, but I don't get to all those other schools as much as I'd like to. So it was great to see the dudes, coach at Indiana or Arizona State or Penn State or Minnesota or, Coastal, all those guys, and just chat and pick their brain on stuff for some stories I'm working on and just to get a feel for how their program is doing. Because a lot of these guys I haven't seen in over a year. You usually see them all at the coaching convention every year or at some of the conference meetings, and didn't see it this last year. But they seem to like it a whole lot. The only thing they didn't like is if a kid comes to the camp and he's not actually registered for the camp and he just comes to hang out, they're not allowed to talk to him unless you're on FSU staff, because then the kid is a quote unquote unofficial visitor as opposed to a camper. And so I had to watch a lot of these coaches tell these kids, hey, I can't talk to you because you don't have a camp shirt on. And if it's a violation.
Cover 3 listeners, we just want to remind you that you can follow and stream the Cover 3 podcast on Spotify. If you're listening on Spotify right now, go to the Cover 3 show page and hit that rectangle follow button so that when the new episodes are dropped, they'll be right at the top of your feed. We've been really expanding our Spotify presence, putting together some playlists to be able to, put all of the common content together. We're having a lot of fun on the publishing side, and we know that you will enjoy it on the listening side. So once again, go to the Cover 3 show page on Spotify, hit that rectangle follow button so that when new episodes are dropped, they'll be at the top of your feed. And if you're listening elsewhere or watching on YouTube, why don't you go give Spotify a try and drop us a follow? but anywhere else from across the country, or Danny, as you've sort of noticed from the headlines, in anywhere else stand out from this first week of, the recruiting dead period being over?
I mean, the biggest news for me was not even the recruiting from the high school's perspective, was the transfer portal. Like, we're in the age of free agency, and when that free agency window opens up, Kirby Smart within the span of 15 minutes gets the top 2 players, the best on offense and the best on defense. Like, that to me was a kind of probably the biggest story we've seen in the last week. Now, what does it mean? Because I don't know if one of them will be eligible is a whole nother question, but that to me was the story of the past week with the recruiting period opening up.
Is the eligibility question for Kendrick? Because is it for Gilbert? Okay.
Yeah. Both, isn't it?
Eric Gilbert announced his intention to transfer to Georgia. He was at LSU. He was the team's second leading receiver. Initially said he was going to go to Florida. Now he's back open. He's a Georgia native. And so the idea that he would get pulled back into Georgia is not all that surprising. Darion Kendrick, we'd been talking about that here on the podcast. Rusty Mansell had sort of singled out that as a possibility. Darion Kendrick had some legal issues that led to his release from Clemson. Of course, Eric Gilbert, with the SEC, another news item was that the SEC is going to allow intra-conference transfers. So what is the eligibility questions for both of these?
I think with Kendrick, wasn't it the legal thing?
The legal side?
I don't think that's an issue anymore. From everything I've seen, the case was dropped now.
Are we assuming that he kept going to classes after the arrest? That's kind of my question. Like, I'm interested in following this, guys. That's what I'm gonna say about this. I want to see academically for both.
For Gilbert, I think it's more of the behind the scenes rumblings that you hear. It's a massive question mark. Like, I don't know. I'll be more surprised if he is out there week 1 against Clemson. With Kendrick, I'm not as quite as sure, but from people kind of in the know, how many times have we seen this before where they figure it out? Like, they figure out a way to get them in a boatload of classes in the summer and get you back up to speed where you're eligible, and you figure out a way to make it happen. So that's like, nothing would shock me, but I do think Gilbert has more significant challenges to get eligible. I took a ton of heat on this because I was, when this news came down, it's like, man, this is huge for Kirby, who has already amassed one of the most talented rosters in the country. But I said, be careful, because these are 2 what I would describe as high risk, high reward individuals who are coming into your program. They're incredibly talented, right? That's documented for both of them. But I do think they come with a risk. 1, the eligibility risk, but 2, the risk of the type of player who, 1, wasn't showing up to a lot of practices at Clemson, was, enough of a knucklehead to get into some trouble, enough to where Dabo had to dismiss him from Clemson. And then another one in Eric Gilbert, who, remember, was going to transfer to Florida, has kind of had some inconsistencies off the field with where he stood. So you're bringing in some guys who, and then, immediately a bunch of Georgia fans were ticked off saying, well, what about Florida State guys, bunch of, criminals out there, and bringing up a lot of stuff and players who had off the field issues. And that is 100% true. Players don't care about those types of issues. Like, right? I mean, let's just be honest. Like, if I'm throwing to a receiver, I don't care what his illegal issues are off the field. You know what I wanted to be able to count on? That he was going to be at practice, that he was going to run the route he was supposed to, that he was going to deliver when he was called upon. And probably one of those things that I would look for is somebody who's going to be my teammate and going to produce through thick and thin. No matter if we're playing for a national championship or we lost the first or second game of the season, like, I want somebody I can count on. And when this is kind of that new era where this is going to be a risk, I think, with everybody, where different players, different mindsets, a lot of guys have NFL goals, and that's all they want to do. And yeah, the national championship goals are kind of ancillary. Like, if that happens on the way, great. If not, it's not going to kill me. So I think there's a risk that runs with the type of character of a player you're bringing in. And that's where I was getting at with the explanation of, these are some character risks that you're taking. In one of those may be legal issues, but the more significant one is both these guys have, moved on from programs that they had a pretty good chance of winning at, and they couldn't fall in line there. And maybe it works out great. I really hope it does. But I think there's some significant risk there, and Kirby's willing to take on that risk. And almost every coach in the country would be willing to take the same risk.
Okay, so do you think that changes? Like, Georgia has a very high floor. If Gilbert and Kendrick are not cleared to play in 2021, Georgia can still win the SEC championship. They still have the pieces on that roster that they can win the SEC championship. Do you think that the addition of either one of these players changes that floor? Like, could it impact the program and the team negatively to where it causes that kind of issue?
See, I think that's the great unknown risk. And that's where I think the risk is. Like, the risk or the reward to the upside, the line versus Georgia didn't move, and their line to win the SEC didn't move. Like, they're the same. Like, normally in the NFL with a big time, like, I haven't checked yet, but I guarantee the Titans win total and their chances to win the AFC have probably changed pretty dramatically. And so there's an aspect there where I do think there's a risk where your locker room could, like, in college, players are more, they're more immature. They're more impacted by distractions. And if a player is having issues, so like, I don't know. That's where I think this is intriguing, because I do think there could be a downside risk if you've got somebody, let's just say, let's say they lose to Clemson and Kendrick gets showed up by his old team. Like, how is he going to handle that? Let's say they pick on him. I'm just throwing out scenarios where, and he's like, man, I mean, what if you start off with a couple rough losses? Is he going to opt out and say, I'm going to start preparing for the NFL? Or if Gilbert's not getting enough balls thrown his way and JT Daniels is struggling, is he going to call him out? This could happen with anybody, but with players who have had a history of not making the most mature decisions, I think there's a risk in that. And that could divide a locker room and could impact the actual product on the field and your ability to win games.
So we talked about this before on the show. I know Barton brought it up before. Certain programs are more focused on fit, and certain programs are more focused on just accumulating as much talent as possible. And among the really big boys, I don't think you can find a bigger split in this than Clemson and Georgia. Like, we talked about how, Dabo tells his guys, hey, you get X number of knuckleheads, and the rest of these dudes better be really damn good kids so that the knuckleheads fall in line. I think they knew Kendrick was a risk when they signed him. I think he was one of those allotted ones, and he didn't end up working out there. Too many strikes. Georgia says, come on, we'll make it fit. Best players will play. And we're just, you got to compete for your job. Look, Georgia's booted guys too. That's not to say like they're not running the prison football team. Like I don't think they've got a bunch of hardcore criminals on their team or anything like that. But like, they care a little more, I think, about talent than they do fit. And Clemson cares a little more about fit. And I've said before, I think Clemson actually could be better in our recruiting rankings if they went after more talent, but they purposely choose to really focus on fit, which among the teams that recruit at that crazy high level is a bit of an outlier, right?
And when you say, just clarify, when you say fit, you're not talking about, does he fit with our defensive scheme or our offensive scheme? It's, do I fit into the culture that we are trying to build?
Exactly. Danny nailed it. But ultimately, I think these are guys that really impact Georgia in a way that if they click, Georgia could be the favorite to win it all. Right? I mean, it's certainly possible.
That's the readjusted ceiling. Like, if you add Kendrick at close to 100% of his projected performance, if you add Eric Gilbert at close to 100% of his projected performance, you insert them into this Georgia team, a Georgia team that needs help on the back end and a Georgia offense that needs pass catchers, then you're leveling up from what I was talking about, that very high floor, to national championship.
I mean, two guys that if they play 13, 14 games are guaranteed top 100 picks and likely first round types.
Yeah. I mean, they're 5-star projection. I think Kendrick was a 5-star too. So they should be a top 40 pick.
Yep.
And that's very, very, very interesting stuff. And as Bud mentioned, we'll keep an eye on this story. The odds makers might be doing that too, actually. If the odds makers are sitting back and being like, yeah, let's wait till they get cleared before we start moving this too much. But somebody's already got a ticket on it. Coming up on the other side, what makes a great recruiter? We dive into that, how it's changed, and also moving ahead, maybe even identify a few along the way. Next. Loved this for this month. Loved this for this show, especially coming off of the camp, because I believe, Bud, this was probably your suggestion from the ideas tab, but what makes a great recruiter? And I wanted, if you guys don't mind, I wanted to actually start asking Danny, from even like tapping in from your own perspective in terms of what you experienced, and then also from covering the sport and remaining close to the sport, you know, how you've seen it sort of start to shift and change as we start to move into the modern era.
So I thought it was a great question too. And there's a couple different ways I want to answer this, because I'm torn with one of my answers. But I'll go back to my experience, because there were probably 3 guys that separated themselves that I remember building relationships with and continuing on, and like just they stood out to me. One was Mark Richt. Obviously, it was important in my role to go to Florida State. One was Cam Cameron, who was the quarterback coach at Michigan at the time. And the other one was Charlie Strong, who was the defensive line coach at Florida at the time. And he was my lead recruiter for the Gators, which ultimately, and I had a good relationship. He was easy to talk to. But in the back of my mind, I'm like, man, I kind of want to talk more to who I'm going to be working with. You know, like the fact that he was a defensive coach kind of hindered it somewhat. But I felt like they were easy to talk to. I felt like I could trust them. I felt like they were honest with me. And I felt like, you know, in a day-to-day setting, and this goes back to the Cam Cameron, Mark Richt, like, could I envision myself playing for these guys in meetings on the sideline? And I felt like, yeah, these are good fits. And with Spurrier, who recruited me some, but not as much as Charlie Strong, you know, there was a history there, and he was a little more arrogant. And, you know, I'd ask him about, you know, but it's kind of awkward. You don't want to say, are you going to bench me if I throw a couple picks? But that was the trend at the time, where he was not afraid to cycle through quarterbacks. And, you know, he'd give you some arrogant answer. We're like, well, then don't throw interceptions and you'll stay in the game, or something like that. So it kind of became this. So that was my experience. Like, those are some of the things that I was looking for and that I found attractive when I was being recruited. You know, other guys, you know, you get football coaches who struggle to talk about anything besides football. They don't have a ton of personality, and it just kind of left you kind of wanting more. Dealt with some of those. So that was what I was looking for. Now, from the flip side of what makes a good recruiter, my initial hunch of what makes a good recruiter, I'll be curious to see if Bud agrees with this, is you kind of have to be a chameleon. Like, you have to kind of adjust your personality to who you're talking to, right? And to what they are looking for. But then, is that really the best? And like, you can fool kids, which I've seen happen all the time. But is it about, you know, being true to yourself if that's not what the player's looking for? No, you kind of have to be like a used car salesman. Like, you know, I've been shopping for a car, and it's hilarious how you go in to the dealership, and, you know, even like something as stupid as masks. Like, if I go in without a mask on, the salesman will be like, yeah, I can't believe we have to wear these masks. Like, let's get rid of these. And if I wear a mask, the guy's like, right on, his mask is on. He's like, yep, we're going to be safety first. You know, it's like, and I guarantee you both of those salesmen probably have different views, and they're going to approach every potential customer, whatever they're doing, they're going to follow along. Right. And so, like, as a recruiter, your job is to sell the university and to sell the program. And I think that's kind of a reality. And your job as a high school or as a recruit is kind of figure out who's selling you BS and who's legit. Because I think that's what makes a good recruiter. Like, I think you have to be able to adjust to the player that you're recruiting. Is that fair, Bud? Like, do you think that's an accurate assessment? I don't know if that's the best decipher of what's the best recruiter or what makes a good recruiter, but I think that's an asset that would help you.
Look, Danny really nailed it, right? The best recruiters are the best salesmen. You know, they establish the relationship. They make it more about the product, and they make it more about, or less about the product and more about the relationship. And they create that bond of trust, and that's how they get kids. I do think that there is a little. Sometimes, are the best recruiters actually the best people for your program as coaches? Is another interesting question. Maybe we can tackle in a separate episode, because now in the transfer portal era, if you do sell them, you know, a bill of goods, they can bolt. if it's not like that. And so there are guys out there who I think are not always honest with recruits or stretch the truth, maybe a little bit, or misrepresent some things. But yeah, you have to, the best recruiters, right? They're charismatic. They are relentless as far as you and I might think it's really annoying to get 800 text messages in a day. And some recruits do too. And the ones who think it's annoying, you don't do that to them. But the ones that love that attention, yeah, exactly. Figure it out. Exactly. You also need to figure out sort of what makes the kid tick, and find a way to kind of hammer that point home and figuring out like what, where's that power up? Where's that 3-point shot? Where's that 5-point shot? Throw back the NBA Jam that I can hit over and over again. And then also you need to find out who is like the adult decision maker in this process and establish a good relationship with them. Is it mom, dad, grandma, uncle / handler / 7-on-7 coach? Is it the high school coach? Typically there is somebody who is really helping them make decisions. And sometimes it's more than one person, and you have to find a way to work both, like, let's say high school coach and mom, who may disagree on where they want this recruit to go. And you can't totally play favorites there. You want to kind of work them both. So identifying what makes the kid tick, identifying who is like which adult is going to help him make the decision, are two really important things. Being a really good salesperson and just being a charismatic salesman and getting people to believe what you're selling is obviously really important. But also, I think it's important to survey the field and know when to cut bait and know when to be sort of honest with your head coach. I had a guy who was recruiting at a school not named Alabama, and I was talking to him, and he was driving to see Devontae Smith. Okay. And then he realized, like some people that we knew, and he's like, wait, that? I said, yeah. He goes, I'm gonna call you back. I'm gonna call my head coach. I'm not driving down here to practice recruiting. And he did. And he turned back around down I-10 because he knew Devontae Smith was going to Alabama. Right. Like the ability to recognize, like it's sort of like a poker analogy, right? Okay. I saw another card to the turn. I'm going to fold on the river. I'm not pushing all in just to finish second on this kid, because it's a zero-sum game. There ain't no prize for second place in recruiting, at least not in the short term. In the long term, maybe if the kid tells his high school teammates who are younger than him, hey man, I really like this school and I visited, I'm not picking it, but it's, it's legit. That there's something there, but knowing when to cut bait, knowing when to move on. Another thing you got to do is keep your secondary and tertiary targets warm and making sure those kids feel the love, even though you are not ready to accept a commitment from them or not ready to offer. But being able to manage a full calendar of plan A and plan B and plan C is a really difficult task, but the best recruiters are able to do it. They make the kid feel loved, but not so loved that he's like, hey coach, I want to commit, right? Or they're able to feed him good excuses like, oh, hey, only our head coach can take commitments, and this is like the 1 week of the year he takes vacation. So like let's come back next week. And then next week's comes and you're like, hey, actually he only takes commitments in person. So like let's make sure you get you up here again. Being able to kind of string kids along as a recruiter is a major skill.
And that feels icky.
It does.
Yeah. I mean, the conflict of authenticity and a chameleon is bananas. Like to imagine, but putting yourself in that headspace. I'm going to add poker player to this list because I really think that that's an important part of this. But I said a great recruiter has to be a private investigator. They've got to be able to like get all of the information that a PI would get and use that information to put together a game plan. You've got to be a politician because that's the relationship with the high school coaches, the relationships with, I guess that's also a little bit of the secondary and tertiary. And then this is one that I think might be more important now than it has been in decades prior, but you've got to be a motivator for your current players, because how often do we start to hear about how current like players that are already on the roster are the ones that are really like leading the charge, or somebody who's already committed, who's trying to get a bunch of their peers. But the messaging that can come from a freshman quarterback who's saying, hey, like, we are going to do this together. Come and join me and this group, and we're going to make it happen. I think that can be far more impactful than a message that's coming from a coach, something from your peers. And so as a recruiter, within the context of being a private investigator, a poker player, and a politician, you've got to be able to be a motivator to other members of the recruiting class and then members of your current roster. Pair up the right people and say, look, y'all have got to be able to be the extra piece of this, because that's what's going to make this prospect attracted to coming to play alongside you.
While it feels icky, I totally agree. I don't like that side of it. And to make sure like it isn't one-sided, it's working both ways, that dance that goes, because for every coach that's trying to string the kid along because he's making sure there's not a better option, a lot of the players are looking for better options too, right? Like they might have an offer from a, mid to low tier ACC team, and they kind of want, that's a good offer for them, but they've got their eyes also on maybe a middle to upper tier SEC school that if they offered, they would jump at it. And they've had these conversations, but they haven't got that offer yet. And they're trying to string along this team in the ACC or the Big 12 or wherever it is and saying, yeah, I'm really interested. Let's schedule that visit. Let me get out there. But, I got exams coming up, and they're both stringing each other along, and it works both ways. So there's this awkward dance that takes place, and it can get really uncomfortable for both sides. And unfortunately, it leads to a lot of burnt bridges and, nasty feelings. And, it leaves you with a bad taste in your times, more times than not, I would say, for a lot of kids and coaches, like for both sides.
If a recruiter asks me, I never tell him which school to go to, but I have told him, go to the school that wants you the most, because they're the school that's going to value you the most throughout your time on campus, right? If you are plan C or plan D at mega school, they're probably taking you to fill the roster. Now, if you develop, great, but they're going to recruit over you. Like, they're not going to have to go to plan C, plan D next year and the year after that. One of those years, they're going to land their plan A at your position, and he's going to jump you, most likely. You don't see a lot of these guys that are plan C, plan D start. They're there because you have to take somebody, right? And like we see it all the time, like, wow. So don't just pick the logo. Pick where is going to set you up the best. Pick a school that's going to value you throughout your time on campus.
But how have you seen what the great recruiter and the profile of a great recruiter, how have you seen that change? And are there any like projections moving forward? One thing that stands out is social media, just the ways of communication are constantly changing, all the way to hopping on that headset and let's get in the gamer room and let's figure out a way to continue that relationship, because that's not a text or a call. But other pieces of that, what are you starting to see, and what kind of recruiters are separating themselves?
I don't know that the skill set for being a great recruiter has changed all that much. Maybe I think with the one difference perhaps between now and when Danny was being recruited, and Spurrier commented on this sometimes, he's like, I don't know how they do it. They just land, top 4 defensive ends in the country all inside a day. I guess those guys all knew they were going to play together. I think nowadays you have to be more aware that kids are more aware of whom else you're recruiting, and the kids do chat with each other quite a bit. For instance, if you're recruiting 2 quarterbacks and you're telling both quarterbacks, hey, they got a great chance to start, well, you may not end up landing one of those guys. Like you don't see a whole lot of schools take 2, plan B type quarterbacks. You usually get like an A and like a D, a guy who's more developmental, or you go one high school, 1 portal. So kind of balancing what you tell kids, knowing that basically anything you tell them, they're probably going to tell to other kids, is important. And I don't think, like, Danny, did you talk to all these other quarterback recruits back in the early 90s?
So Chip's right. So Danny Werfel and I met at like an FCA camp the summer before our senior years, and we traded numbers, and, we did keep in touch. And so that was one thing I really appreciated, were schools, and Florida State was open. Like Mark Richt would say, hey, I'd be like, who are you recruiting? He's like, well, we have you pegged. We have Danny Werfel and Eric Kresser, another quarterback. He's like, these are the quarterbacks we're talking to. And so it was an honesty, but that honesty also provided a little bit of pressure, because it was like, well, one of you, we'd probably take all of you, but it was honest. And then there were other schools, and Warfel and I would call each other and like say, man, what did this school tell you? And I'd be like, oh, they said I was the number one target. He'd say, they told me the exact same thing. And be like, oh, and then we'd both be like, cross them off the list. Like, I don't want somebody that's going to lie to me now, because if they're lying to me now, there's a good chance they're going to lie to you when you get on campus about playing time or starting or whatever. I wanted somebody who's going to be forthright with and be open about it. I can handle it. I can accept it. If you're recruiting somebody else, that's perfectly fine. I just want to know what the deal is. And so I think players a lot of times appreciate the honesty, but there's a risk in that, because there might be players that say, no, I want to be told I'm the number one guy. And if they don't feel that way, then see ya. So then what do you do if you're a recruiter?
It's tough.
Then as a recruiter, I wouldn't want that player. Like, I don't want somebody that's going to be afraid of competition, or, you know what I mean? Like, it's a part of this balance that goes into these relationships.
Did you announce a day before? Like, weren't you and Danny?
I did. Yeah. So we talked a lot, and I liked Florida a lot. And Warfel liked Florida State a lot. And I think we probably both would have had a lot of success had we switched roles and gone to one or the other. But I was at a point where I was like, it was getting to be really close to signing day. And I knew like Warfel was considering Florida State. And I don't know if there was a decisive moment or like something that was said or happened, but I was kind of over it. Bud was talking about it gets old, and this was before text. The phone was ringing off the hook, like nonstop. It was phone call, answering machine going off. And my dad actually really enjoyed it. He did a lot of the talking to the coaches, and I'd be like, I'm busy. I can't talk right now. And he would take most of it. But I got to a point where I was like, all right, enough is enough. And I just went, all right, I'm going to go to Florida State. And then like the next day, Warfel said, all right, I'm going to go to Gainesville. I'm just going to go to Florida. And so it kind of just.
You were the domino.
Yeah, exactly. And we both knew, like, we didn't, as much as we weren't afraid of competition, like for our careers, did it make a lot of sense where one of you was going to have to sit in the bench? And we're like, no. So we kind of knew we weren't going to go to the same place.
Were you aware of other quarterback recruits like throughout the country?
So that was really a unique circumstance, because we met ahead. Like, there was no Facebook. There was no, now if you were really, I guess, diligent, maybe you could have gone through a media member to like track down a number, or on some of these visits. But I'm trying to think, even other visits, there were a couple other awkward circumstances that arose. One, when I went to, so of my official visits, I went to Florida State, Michigan, and Washington. Washington was a national champion the year before. And so I was like, hey, I want to go. And the only reason I went to Washington was a free trip to the West Coast. I knew I wasn't going to go there. I was like, but I want to go to the West Coast. They were a national champion. It sounds cool to tell your friends they're recruiting me. So I went there. So Damon Huard was a quarterback there at Washington. I think he was Brunel. I think he was his backup. He wasn't starting yet. So he picks me up from the airport, and we're driving around. It's like, we could be, in theory, competing against each other. Even though I'm younger, he was only a couple years older. I could unseat him for his job.
Oh, they had a player pick you up?
Yeah. So
wow.
Like, he was my host for the trip. And so maybe it wasn't from the airport, but there was definitely like, we were alone together. He was tasked with taking me out and showing me around. And so like that, it's kind of awkward. You're feeling each other out. Where are you from? And then he was like, I was expressing the displeasure with the flight, because it takes like 8 hours to get out there. I had to fly through Dallas and then there, and it was like a long day. And he was like, would you really come out here? I was like, no. And then like, as soon as he knew I wasn't coming, like we had a blast, like we hit it off and it was awesome. But like, it's awkward, that relationship. But like I knew Tommy Frazier, but he was a triple option quarterback out of Dayton. Like, I knew we weren't in the same market. We've actually played on the Florida-Georgia All-Star team together, but that was after we had committed. Chris Walsh was another one. He ended up, Steve Walsh's younger brother, ended up going to Miami. I met him at an awards banquet, but we had already both decided the various decisions. His brother had played there, so it kind of made sense. But not like today's. I didn't go to any camps. There wasn't 7-on-7. There wasn't Elite 11. Those are the opportunities where you become friends with guys. And then even if you don't want to just DM them or reach out to them via social media without ever meeting them, you can actually meet them and develop a relationship where you are trading information, which is really valuable.
I think that's a huge difference from 20 years ago. Because I mean, look, you easily could recruit a kid from Miami and one from Georgia and one from Alabama and have them all sign with you in Gainesville, right? Yep. If you wanted to, and they would never know about each other. And in fact, I'm pretty sure that happened a number of times, especially as some of these power schools started recruiting a little more nationally. And as long as you coordinate the visits and make sure that, you know, Danny Cannell and whoever from Tennessee is not coming in on the same weekend, you're golden.
Todd Helton.
Yeah, they're never going to know about each other. Yeah, exactly. Oh man.
He was Todd Helton remember he was quarterback at Tennessee?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
We were out we played on a high school all-star baseball team together. So that's how I got to know Todd. He was incredible. I was like, this dude plays football too, because I knew what he could do at baseball. But
so it was very obvious like he was not going to be like long-term football. Yeah.
As you look at the recruiter rankings from this past year, Charles Huff, now the head coach at Marshall, got number 1. Carl Scott, defensive backs coach at Alabama, number 2. Dante Williams from USC, number 3. Mickey Joseph, number 4 at LSU. Brian Williams, defensive line coach from Maryland, at number 5.
Brian Williams got Dalvin Cook, by the way.
To Florida State?
Yeah.
So what's...
Dalvin's grandma loved him.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the recruiter rankings have a lot to do with how the system has assigned the primary and the secondary and sort of the way that information is logged. It takes on the same numerical value as a recruiting class ranking, right?
Yeah.
So do you find often the numbers line up with your observations in a recruiting cycle?
Yeah, I would say so. They're also line up with teams that win for the most part, right?
I mean, when you've got multiple Alabama, multiple Ohio States, like a couple Georgias in there, it's like, oh, okay.
So that matches up pretty well. I think the one thing here that I would point out is that the sample set, I think, is now we do assign a recruiter of the year because obviously it gets our name in the news. But if you're going to evaluate recruiters, you need to do it over a multi-year span, and you probably need to see them work in person as well, or at least be around people who have seen them work in person, because there are guys, like, it just depends on who you get in that year. I think if you look at it over like 3 or 4 years, you get a much better picture, because you may just have a year where the team is not taking as many guys at the position for which you're responsible, or from the region, for which you are normally responsible, and you may drop in the rankings. I think all the guys you named off actually are really good recruiters. I would add Brian Hartline at Ohio State as a guy who I think absolutely kills it. He's really, really good.
He was number 9 in the class. Yeah. So still top 10 without a doubt.
Is there an age that's better? Like, I'm looking at some of these coaches appear to be younger, looking at their profiles. And is that a false assumption to make? Could you be a coach in your 60s or 50s and still be as effective as a coach in their late 20s, early 30s?
Kerry Coombs and Charles Kelly are both pretty old.
Yeah. How old is Tim Brewster?
Oh, he's up there because
he's got to be
50s.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if he's 60 yet, but I'm just looking here.
60.
He's one of the top ones.
He is 60. Country, right? Yeah. And he's a really good recruiter too. I mean, you just have to have, infectious energy. You have to understand connections. I guess one other point I would add, I know we're running a little bit long, is you have to be a good politician as well. I was walking around with some coaches yesterday, and they all wear their logos, and the number of kids who come up to them, who introduce themselves and basically tell them, what they're all about. You have to basically sit there and basically humor them, even though there's no chance in hell you're ever going to offer this 5'5" defensive end, right? Because you don't know who his brother or his cousin might be, and you have to you have to represent your university well. Like, they're trying to walk from drill to drill, and sometimes they have to go through like 4 or 5 kids that come up and introduce themselves and want to tell them all about their thing. It's like, damn, it takes like 10 minutes to go from that drill to this drill, just to that. But that's what the best recruiters do. They make everybody feel special, because you just never know who the kid you're talking to, who has no chance in hell playing for you, might be related to or buddies with.
A politician, a poker player, a private investigator, a motivator. Got to be a lot of things to be a great recruiter. But I think it's interesting in the course of this conversation, you made something that stood out to me. The skill set hasn't really changed. the tools have over time, but very cool to break that all down. You can follow him on Twitter at Danny Kanell. You can follow him at Bud Elliott 3. You can follow me at Chip_Patterson. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
See ya.